Hey, Marjinka.
Hi, Guy.
It's good to see you again.
It's good to be seen.
And welcome everybody who's watching this. This is part three of you could say kind of the second version or the continuing version of our conversations on attachment theory and how it relates to circling. And we did a video about a year ago that was about an hour long. And then you've been doing a lot of research and uh, specifically, we're going to be using quotes and have been using quotes out of a particular book that you're going to talk more about, and beginning to have a dialogue between the experience that you've had with me through circling and how you've really found that like something that's happening in circling um, points to a lot of the things that have been researched and documented around attachment theory.
Mhm.
And that so you've been, in a certain sense, you've been standing between like a foot in both worlds and been in this oh my god experience of this is actually, we're practicing this stuff in circling, and you've had quite a fire and a fury, almost I would say, an intellectual fury to really make that connection. And so I've just really appreciated that about you. I've just always appreciated about that, that you um, are permeable to be infected with really brilliant ideas and want to continually explore them and feel moved. Like, no one's asking you to do this, right? You could just have your practice and live your life, but there's something in you that is interested in this and wants to write articles and publish them and do videos with me and post them on Facebook and have a dialogue going on. No one's asking you to do this. This is really coming from someplace in your own heart. And I just want to acknowledge that in you, that this is really generous of you to do this and to provide this, because I'm pretty
Wow.
certain no one else is doing this in the world, but
Wow.
it occurs for you. So I feel
Mm.
blessed to be, I just feel blessed to be in your life and to be impacted by you as I have,
Mm.
and to deepen these distinctions in something that's important to you and to me and so many people that we know and love,
Mhm.
and also people that we would know and love if we knew you as well.
Definitely.
And I'm just curious. I'd love to actually ask you a little more, Jinka, about like what has it been like, for you writing, researching and writing and preparing the quotes and being on camera and having this interview, and like what's the experience? What does this mean to you? What's it like? What's it been like?
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate that because it feels like we're bringing circling directly a little bit into this interview. And so as you've been talking, I just felt this dropping away of all the things I want to talk about today and just watching you reflect me back to me, and just I felt this expansion happening, or just this settling.
Mm.
I guess I was receiving what you were saying. I guess there aren't really words to describe what was just happening while I was listening to you.
Mm. Well, I know one of the things that I said was, I mentioned the fire that you have, that
Hmm.
there's something speaking to you that you feel compelled to write about, to get over fears and anxieties about, being seen in the public and in front of cameras. There's some you're sacrificing a lot of your own comfort and your own time.
I really am. That's true. I mean, I'm starting to really look forward to these videos and I'm enjoying them, but as we keep talking about, there's also a lot of nervous excitement, and um, you're helping me deepen into presence before we start. I really appreciate that. It's actually been mixed. I've been consistently, the way I write is, I know I don't do it in an effective way. I do it where I just create tons of documents. I make a big mess. And then I spend all my time trying to organize it. And in that process is how I was learning this book.
Mm.
And there were times, weeks and months maybe, where I wasn't able to get back in, where I felt kicked out in the last year. But recently, when my brother died, I had another period where I had just been inspired up until he suddenly died. And then I couldn't touch it for a month. So that was in November. And then in end of December and this month, there were a few days where I really struggled with it. I felt lost and confused, and it was overwhelming. I thought, oh my God, I've been doing this for a year and I'm still not ready to have these interviews. And then all of a sudden I had a breakthrough. It started coming together, and I just said, I got to stop messing around. Let's just do something already. So they're as organized as I could get in the last couple of weeks. And the more I sit with it, there's starting to be new dimensions that I'm seeing. For example, I want to mention that, so as I'm seeing the way circling is paralleling attachment theory and psychotherapy in a lot of ways, that so many people are also doing this. They're doing parts of this. And I'm just seeing there's such an inherent drive towards I think so many people are naturally discovering the portals to secure attachment without using that lens. And so one thing I'm wanting is to, just bring the lens to more and more people, even if they've heard of it, to make it more interesting. Because often I think what really makes a difference is when there's an equal focus on subjectivity and intersubjectivity. And so psychotherapy can often focus more on the intrapsychic and a little bit on the intersubjective. But I'm
just so people are clear on the table.
Okay.
Intrapsychic or intersubjective.
Intrapsychic, like inside yourself.
So that's like subjectivity, and then intersubjective is the we, the space between the two of us, the relationship.
And one part that we're going to get to in a couple or 2 or 3 segments is about how mindfulness works in attachment, what I'm getting about it, how it works in attachment healing. And that's part of the stance towards experience, the way Wallen describes it. This book, I don't think we've mentioned it yet, Attachment Healing and Psychotherapy by David Wallen. And so many, it's an incredibly long tradition and elaborate and complex of mindfulness. In fact, I'm following this free online mindfulness summit right now through Sounds True. It's available to you. You can watch every day for this week or next week, or you can buy it for $200. It's fascinating. 32 presenters, I think. And so there's so much to say about mindfulness, but having read this book, what I'm getting is there might be missing, for those that are suffering in relationship, even when you meditate and you study deeply the field of mindfulness, mentalization, which we'll get to next time, is the psychological dimension, and being able to see the states that you're in. And again, I want to emphasize, attachment theory is talking about relationship. So it's really emphasizing, I think, the interdependence of being securely attached, rather than the independence of being avoidantly attached. Tradition that the attachment for the child creates a field that our bodies learn how to regulate, how to feel. And what predicts attachment is the degree to which what is allowed, what experience is allowed and what is not allowed, what can be felt, what cannot be felt, because it's imperative that there is this attachment. And so the child will, like I said last time, I think, will put aside unconsciously the things that don't fit with the parent. But as adults, when we get to adulthood, then I think that is a primary way of recovering. Like I was saying before, the hourglass theory, and I didn't get an actual hourglass yet, but I got the next best thing, which is an image of an hourglass. And so we talk about the original experience and secure attachment being the goal, and that it teaches us these capacities, how to be in the world.
Mm,
But then when we get to adulthood, if we did not have the secure base
mm,
established, that we can feed these capacities in different ways,
mm,
and
mm.
then it grows that secure base.
Okay.
And
So
so,
basically,
mhm.
so is it fair to say that basically what you're saying is that, like, if you didn't have it when you were a kid, it doesn't mean that you can't establish it for yourself now.
Yeah, that's what I'm reading about. That's what Wallen and many people,
Mm,
a, an important lens that the therapist has to wake up parts of themselves. I've been doing that
mm,
for the last 5 years, with you and with the community here in Berkeley. And I, I haven't been doing it enough. I want more. I need more, because I've been leading the groups, and I found that it's harder for me to really wake up these edges in myself when I'm also holding the space. And that's been an ongoing dialogue, as you know. And in fact, I wanted to mention one other part. I was thinking of
mhm,
Alexis Shepherd, and I was thinking how well she does these three parts where she shares her direct experience,
mhm,
um, like subjective experience. She's in the interaction. She reflects. She's attuning with the others in the group, and she's holding the space.
mhm.
And I just really see her do those three things really well.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, she's quite exceptional at those three things. She's like almost, I would almost say she's almost kind of like the archetypal mother in some respects, right? Of
Yeah, I think
like
that's a good way to put it.
deeply, because a mother, right? It's like, so when I think about a mother, the mother loves the child, like,
Mm.
and it's not just like an altruistic act. No, she's enjoying the experience of loving the child. My girlfriend's sister just had a baby, and
Mm.
I'm watching this pure potential affect the family, and
Wow.
watching
Mm.
this new grandmother basically look at this child, and then just you could just the
Mm.
bliss going through every cell of her body,
Mm.
right? And of the mother and of Brienne when they see the child. It's as if I was on vacation, and they were they that her family, the child was coming in like a day later, and I was taking a nap downstairs, and I just had just started to wake up as the baby was coming in, and for some reason I just listened, and I thought, and I started to imagine, like, what if I imagined that baby Jesus was coming, or baby Buddha was coming, and then I listened to the way everyone was responding upstairs, and it would have totally fit. It was the same kind of thing. It's like, oh my God, the second coming, or the most beautiful thing in the world, and
Mm.
watching the energy that this is what I think children give back, because they're a
Mm.
lot of work. and man, we are a lot of work. So I think the payback for having
Mm.
kids is that we get a direct intimation of what we're like. We have a direct intimation of the pure potential that a human being is. Because when you think about what one single human being is capable of, it is profound to be with an infant, right? It's profound to be with an infant. And it seems the biological response to that, like the spiritual response to that, but it's deeply rooted in the body. You can feel the whole family
Mm.
gather around as if a bright, pure light was coming into being. Proximity to the attachment figures serve literally to regulate the internal functioning of the infant's body. And evidence suggests that the quality of the attachment relationship, secure or insecure, influences how the infant's developing physiology shapes the body's self responsiveness to experience.
So that phrase is one part we want to take away there. The relationship influences the body's self responsiveness to experience
Mm-hmm.
through the relationship. And then you can read that next sentence.
Let's read that from the top. For example, the secure infant of sensitively responsive mothers have a higher threshold for the activation of physiological stress responses than the insecure offspring of dismissing, preoccupied, and especially unresolved mothers.
And so that phrase, the higher threshold for the activation of physiological stress responses, that is about affect regulation. You know, we feel emotion. Emotion is a primary means of us knowing what's important to us, what we care about, right? Those are two phrases that you focus on in circling.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
But if the energy of the emotion of the stress, if there's a stress response is too much because of it wasn't regulated early on in relationship, that somebody, you know, people have different responses, but generally if somebody's avoidantly attached, they shut it down and withdraw to manage the stress response. Or if they're anxious, it just comes forward more, for example, of not being able to keep feeling the experience, like fix it over here. Can you help me fix this?
Right.
You know, so those, as children and adults, those could be two ways of responding to it, not having, not integrating the physiological stress response through
Right.
relationship.
And isn't that like, I remember when I had Forrest, my son, he was watching the pattern of just how he was, especially when he was just an infant, right? He's kind of like an undifferentiated blob, right? That slowly someone started to be there, which was fascinating to me. About, we can talk about that. I think that in objects relations theory, they call that hatching, when all of a sudden someone's behind the eyes.
Oh, wow.
I can't quite explain that, but it seemed that being a baby is a series of is basically being an undifferentiated bunch of tubes, right? Where there's a buildup of excitation, and then of, like, say, a need. I'm hungry, or I need to poop, or I need to suck on a nipple, or whatever it is, right? And it would build up as of excitation, and then the mother or me or somebody, the caregiver, would come and then meet the need, and there was this release and relaxation of excitation, and it just seemed to have this kind of movement of excitation, build up, and release, excitation, build up, and release. So how I'm here, that's what I thought of as you were talking about it. So I would imagine if the mother, if there was a buildup of excitation, and instead of a need being met, instead it was like they got the nipple, but it was filled with like the mother's insecurity about whether or not she knows how to do it, or she's a good mother, or if it got met with like affect of disdain or frustration, or some version other than, oh, let me meet your need. Then that excitation builds up, and then at a certain point it probably crosses thresholds, right?
Yes.
And that crossing of threshold over a number of times starts to become a pattern in your nervous system.
And so this is one thing that I think, there's two parts that I think that quote was focusing on, that there's overarching concepts to carry through everything we're talking about, that circling is doing, which is we are practicing emotional attunement, affect attunement. And the idea is, when that's happening, it's helping the other to regulate affect. So that's one very important part.
Right. And just so we're clear about some of these technical terms, when you mean regulate, right? When we self-regulate, what are you actually referring to?
Well, I think that it is the way you just described, that excitement emerges in the system, and then we can feel it, first of all, because we can be dissociated from the feelings, and we can just be in thoughts or images or spaced out, many different responses to not being directly connected to the rise and fall of energy in the body. And so regulating means that you can that you have options
Mm,
for how to manage the energy. You have enough ability to say, if you're with people, okay, hold on, I need a minute. And just either you stay there and you breathe, or you say,
mm,
can you go take a walk with me? I mean, you have these, I think this is part of mentalizing, is the ability to perceive
mm,
different things that are happening within you and in relationship, and to be able to choose options
mm.
for how to respond. So we'll, of course,
Yeah.
be getting to that next
So is it
time.
fair to say when people say, in circling, a lot of times people say like, oh, I feel a lot more grounded hearing that,
Yeah.
or feel a lot more centered, or more in my body. Is that, like, you could say, is like, in a certain sense, that's them feeling self-regulated,
Yeah.
or when they stop and they take a deep breath and they just kind of breathe into the intensity and make room for the intensity, such that they can like have it versus it
Hmm.
having them or something.
Absolutely. And I think there's a term also, mutual regulation, something like that. And so I think in circling, we can often be doing it mutually, and then self-regulating is I think more where you feel contained within yourself.
Right.
And
So there's a way in which regulation can happen. You can integrate and self-regulate, and self-soothe. Is that another term? Like self-soothing
yeah,
oftentimes can be a
that'd be
form
part
of
of it.
regulation. But then there's what you're saying, is that there's the possibility of insecure attachment bonds, where we can couple and relate to each other in such a way that we can regulate each other.
Hmm.
And that's really what we're kind of getting at, is like the possibility of
Yeah.
relationships and ways of interacting where both of us feel much more enriched and regulated and centered in our own experience.
And I think maybe we should jump over all this stuff I wish we could talk about, but go to how we listen in circling, because I think that what I was saying in the last segment was, this is where I take a creative leap, right? So much of Wallen's his outline of his book, so much easily is paralleling in what we're doing in circling, but in many ways. But then this leap that I'm taking is that the question of, if a surrogate field, a surrogate caregiver, a surrogate secure base, a surrogate safe haven is created because of the mutual agreements that we have, so that we may not even know each other, but because we know that we are here to welcome everything we can welcome, to welcome our subjective experience, each other's experience. We know that's what we're trying to do, even when we can't, even in moments where we feel shut down or feel upset. We know ultimately there's a field that's saying it's okay. We welcome the shutdown, that the most basic agreement is that we are agreeing to be in relationship. So
Mm,
even if we just acknowledge, I don't know how to do it in this moment, there's still a deeper intention
mm,
saying, yes, I'm willing to find my way back to relating with you.
totally. I
And
may
then,
not be
yeah.
with you,
Yeah.
but like I've thrown a beacon out through language
Hmm.
that I'm here and I'm connected to you, and I'm going to find my way back.
Yeah, because I have this idea, you can tell me what you think, but I've often said this. I think if sometimes I'll ask someone, are you willing to be in relationship when something's really edgy, and they seem like they don't care anymore, and I've heard somebody say once no, and I made the decision to stop the circle. I said, okay, wait, if you're not willing to be in relationship to these people right now, then we need to pause, time out, because to me it was breaking the agreements. And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder what you think about that.
I think it depends on the situation. It sounds like, one of the commitments you could say that we have is to relationship or staying connected.
Hmm.
And so if the person was like, nope, no
Hmm.
more, and they were closed about it,
That
right? Like,
was that was it. Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't like they were just kind of taking care of themselves, which is
Mhm.
which is a way of actually staying connected to somebody.
Yes, I agree.
But there was a way of just kind of walling it up and shunning or something, or othering you.
They were saying I was not willing to be affected by the other. Basically, I'm just not willing.
Yeah,
You
totally. So,
know,
yeah, then that kind of just breaks the rules of the game.
that's what I was
Yeah. Was there another quote you wanted to go into?
Yeah, so there will be a few here.
Mhm.
So we'll focus mostly on listening principles, but maybe you can just talk a little bit first on how you describe, when we have a Thursday night drop-in circling night, you
Mm.
always say it differently. What would you say right now about how we listen? That's one of the 3 agreements in circling that we use, right? What would you say?
Well, so so for me, I would say that like actually it's been listening and the way that we listen as a virtue and as a standard and as a come from in circling. I've really that has been the most transformative. That's what's transformed to me through circling. Is it's surprisingly so. I wouldn't have thought that in advance. Like, well, how does listening? How could listening transform you? It's like you're just paying attention, right? I think I'm still grokking how deep listening goes. And what we mean by listening in this way is to genuinely listen to another human being as a genuine human being, as a real human being, or as Martin Buber would say, as a genuine I thou. You are thou. In other words, I relate to you not as a means to an end, but as an end in yourself, right? And if you can feel it, like, and Buber talks about it also as, he pairs it off. He says, to be existentially, to be a human being is to be a relationship. We're always in relationship with
Mhm.
entities and events and ourselves and other people, and that we comport, or the way that our stance towards that relationship, he puts in 2 categories. One is an I it relationship, and one is an I thou relationship. And he says that both are spoken as one word, an I it and I thou. There's always the I pull and the other pull. And he says, like, when I relate to you as an it, I'm not relating to you as an entity, a legitimate, meaningful entity in yourself. I'm relating to you as a means to an end, right? And if you can kind of feel the I that comes up, if I were just to be like, for example, if I were to start to relate to you as a means to my need to meet my needs to be accepted or approved of, right, in some way, you can
Mhm.
kind of feel the I that forms in relationship to that. Versus if I meet you and listen to you and apprehend you as a thou, and I really, really want to come in contact with not what I already know about you, but what I don't know about you, right? And if you can kind of feel the respectfulness that comes with being with a legitimate other, you can feel the I that emerges with that, right? In that primordial relational event, I thou. So if you think about listening from that angle, listening becomes not something simply where you just are an empty head, being quiet, paying attention, being filled with information, right? I think that's the common sense notion of listening, is that like being a good listener is simply being quiet and paying attention to what you say. Like as if we open my head up and you fill it with words, and once it's filled and you're done talking, we close that, and then I process the information, and then I respond back to you in some way. But that's not the phenomenological, that's not the way we experience listening,
Right.
right? How we experience listening is there's this way in which in listening to you, especially in the I thou sense of the word, genuinely, really, really listening to who you are in your full humanity, right? Is in a certain sense is to listen to you, is to open up the way I make sense of the world. And through understanding you, through feeling you, through being attuned to you, that I go on a ride. I'm willing to go on a ride. And here's the key, where I'm willing and open to be changed and impacted through the experience of hearing you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. I'm willing to be, I'm touchable. I make myself
Mhm.
touchable. I make
Yeah.
myself being, in a certain sense, being affected,
Mhm.
sometimes really deeply,
Yeah.
I think that listening to so many people open their hearts and finding out who they were at the deepest level, it's like I, I, it's like accompanying people and listening to people that way. I've listened to people that have been so moving and so courageous and have just blown me away
Mm-hmm.
that that it's altered the way that I see reality
Mm-hmm.
through the process of listening to them.
Yeah.
And that I would say that how you feel heard is to the degree that I can communicate to you how I'm being changed by what you're saying. And that's the experience where people feel deeply heard,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a full embodiment. So there's a component to it where there's a embodied attunement. There's a kind of a listening body where there's a porosity, right? A stance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna bring my whole being,
Mm-hmm.
right, to you, and I'm gonna be attuned to you, on a primordial physical embodied level. I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna open myself up to you at a nonverbal level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is really, really important. And such that the words that you say already happen within, arise from a sense of attunement, right? As if you had a tone and I had a tone, and in listening to you, I'm tuning in a bodily way to your particular tone, right? And then out of that animates the conversation, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you can feel the tonality of that change as the conversation happens, right? You can feel the relationship and the tone start to be contributed to both of us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's where you start to create these really epic, beautiful, deep, rich connections and conversations where at a certain point, it's really hard to say that like the two human beings are the source of the conversation. It starts to feel like the conversation or the relationship starts to
Mm.
create two people.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
those are the kinds of things that have, I think, where people have really taken note of circling and gone, like, God, this is really amazing. I mean, I
Yeah.
could just meet a stranger and sit down and have that kind of conversation
Mm-hmm.
where we walk away that enriched and transformed. That's what's possible.
Yeah. So one thing I was noting is there are just at least 4 different parts that you describe that are basically word for word, what therapists are doing in psychotherapy, but yet there's this way of still holding oneself back to a degree, right? So
Me speaking as a
as a
therapist.
therapist, yeah.
Mhm.
And the idea in circling is your 2 human beings or 2 or more meeting and an equal ground. And so that's the part where I think circling is an incredible complement to attachment therapy,
Mm.
because it brings it gives people the ultimate lesson they need, which is how to be equally in relationship, not just somebody who is only looking for your best interest
Right,
and putting aside their own personal needs
right,
a lot of the time
right.
to show up. It gets infinitely more complex in circling.
Mhm.
It can get messy, but in the mess and then the repair is where the learning and the healing happens also.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing you were mentioning was about the approach to the other person, and you I don't even think you said this phrase, but you were referring to assuming positive intent, or maybe you did say it.
Mhm.
And I guess to me, it when we're doing that, if you bring this to any adult relationship you have,
Mhm.
it's already creating a mind state where if you really learn to make that a practice where you assume positive intent,
Yeah.
then you're not leading with that you're working that edge from thinking you're insulting me,
Mm.
right? Or you don't understand me. It's a really complex place, right? When something's at stake and you want someone to get you. And if 2 people who practice circling together, but you're in relationship or a family members, but you can bring that stance of positive intent, I think it teaches the other that you will assume the best of me under
Yeah.
stress. And that does something. I think that just creates a base to rest into.
Yeah,
Easy to
totally.
just get stressed.
Yeah.
But to find that pathway of, wait, what's the deeper, something's hurting here, what's the deeper meaning, and to just let go of the expression of it, just get to the, that's one thing we practice in circling. Another, and I'll have a quote for you to read, is in we listen for how things make sense.
So
Oh,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to give one more part to positive intent.
Mm-hmm.
So like when we practice that, that's a committed thing that we do in circling. It's an intent that we have is that we say that like one of the ways that we're going to listen to each other is really listen for and assume positive intent. It doesn't mean liking what the person says or what they're doing. It doesn't have anything to do with approval, right? But
Right.
it's more like assuming that the person is doing the best they can, right, with what they're given.
Yeah.
And even if they don't think so, really listening for that and holding them in that way. And what I have found, and I've watched people who have practiced that at first it's kind of like it's a it's a stance they take on, almost like they wear it, which is a start, like a coat, like kind of a conceptual thing. But then as time goes on, I've watched people literally be able to perceive the innocence in people, right? To actually have that, to be able to have that, have a limbic felt almost sensory visceral hit of when somebody's just being a bastard, right? Screaming at their face, like actually being able to like deal with the conversation, but hold that person and actually feel the innocence of that person, right? And understand that person as an attuned way, that that's actually possible to develop and to feel, to actually perceive that
Yeah.
spark of light of purity that's within everybody. And like just like when you practice yoga, there's asanas or positions that you hold. And in a certain sense, there are, you could say, relational asanas that we hold, right? And some will be harder for, like for example, I've been lifting weights for years, so I hate downward dog. I mean, it's torturous. It's like the best thing for me, but I hate the yoga instructors. I feel like that they're just like, they're Satan or something like that because I hate. But but then when I get done with it and then I walk outside, when I'm not thinking about doing downward dog, my natural resting like base is more open. And I think the same is ways when you hold an intention of seeing the positive intent in other people and you stretch. So as that person is saying that thing that's like, just like your mother said to you and is activating everything, and you're practicing feeling for the innocence, even as they're hurting you in a certain sense, feeling that, right? And you stretch those capacities, and hold off on what you maybe normally would do,
Which is usually a form of judgment. And
yeah.
so to have that stance of listening for positive intent, I think it changes our own physiology. I think there's a softening and an opening, and the listening changes our body state, which is one of the things we keep wanting to track as we talk here, how the body changes. And because when you talk about how, when we're itting each other, right, I know who you are, everything narrows.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the judge just says, I know what's happening. I know what I think about it. I don't like it.
So you exercise and you're like, that's what's really cool about circling is it's a practice. It's a chance to practice these kinds of relational asanas,
Yes.
such that when you walk out of circling and you're not thinking about circling, when that person says that thing to you, you find yourself just naturally more open in an attuned way, right? Without having to think about it. And so you could say that circling are almost like, you could say, and speaking in this term, if we connect it to attachment theory, are ways of our postures or relational asanas that foster something like secure attachment that we can practice in extreme ways.
Yeah.
Not so that you can walk out there and talk to everybody like you're in a circle, but such that your embodied response becomes a lot more integrated and more open to something like having more a secure base in your life with the people around you.
That's what I'm imagining. And, there's this phrase that oh my gosh, I'm mixing up. Daniel Siegel
Mhm.
refers to, and I think he's referring to somebody else who
I love
coined
him.
this concept of states into traits. And
Mhm.
so I imagine that we're practicing states. Those are the asanas. And then the more every new habit, changing a habit requires repetition. So that's why having a place to practice over and over and over, and it's new every time, which is what's that called in training where you don't do the same thing every time, like CrossFit, or I don't know what, I'm
Mhm.
just getting into that myself, but I forgot the term where
Yeah, you have to surprise your body and shock your body.
that
Otherwise,
part.
yes. Uh-huh.
So it's like that. Every circling drop-in night is different. Different people, different people get circled. That you feel differently.
Mhm.
It's always different. So it is edgy. It can be edgy in a lot of ways. But if you're committed to the practice, you start to realize there's this enduring overall benefit. So um,
And that in practicing, you get to make mistakes. You have liberties to make mistakes, and it's encouraged.
yeah,
You work through those mistakes. That like that if you were to do the same thing in your real life, it could have
yes,
consequences that are too risky.
yes.
But so that's part of the
It's
safety
a
of.
huge part, huge, where people come in and say, am I doing it wrong? How do I do it right? And I really relate to that. Of course we want to have a general idea of, am I in the ballpark? Right. But I like it when you keep reminding people it's okay to make mistakes. Just say what you're going to say and be open to being um, coached, or just, reflected to if you're really missing the mark, if you're giving advice, if you're judging, just owning the experience. Because like you said, in our life, there are consequences for making mistakes, and people, many people might be overly cautious, and that just becomes a way of being, of not all of that experience that is not even allowed to be expressed. We don't get angry, or we don't love, or or we don't cry. Like this is again this is where circling to me and attachment theory are just totally paralleling, because we're talking about the same thing, about waking up these parts of ourselves that we're not allowed in our adult life to express, and having a place where we can just practice a little bit. And it's like the child learning to walk. You have to do it from the inside. You can't just be told, like watching this video, we're telling you listening audience what the parts are, but until we're each doing it ourselves, we have to work those edges from the inside, right?
Yeah, totally.
um, so yeah, so you can read the next one, which is we listen for how things make sense, and you can see that that's written about in the book.
I'll just start that again. Second, we must respond to the underlying intentions, feelings, and beliefs that are the context within which our patients' words and behaviors can be seen to make sense. Responding in this way, in light of the quote intentional stance unquote of our patients, allows them to feel understood in depth, and this translates into a feeling of being accepted. Feeling understood and accepted fosters confidence that their experiences, even those they have had to bury, can be safely contained in the new attachment relationship.
So what did you get from that paragraph?
Well, the experience is like, so one of the things that we say in circling is, how do you know when you feel gotten? What tells you when you feel heard, listened to, or understood, or gotten, or have another term that we use is shared reality. Like, I know that we have shared reality, that you understood what I just said, or you understood me, right? Even more precisely, you understood me. Is the two criteria is like, and I got this from Mark Lewis, thinking deeply influenced circling. It was already
Wow.
happening inside of circling. So a lot of his brilliant distinctions continue to live on. I
Hi,
love Mark.
Mark.
Uh,
Shout
he's,
out to Mark.
he's awesome. He's one of my favorite. In fact, we do these. We just
I
have
saw it. I saw your recent
stuff.
one.
Yes,
Yeah.
we have another one coming up
Nice.
soon. Um, that the criteria of how I know that is that when I share and then you respond to me in such a way that at the end of your response, I end up feeling understood and accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's that those are two distinctive things, and that they can that I've definitely had the experience of feeling understood but not accepted, right? Right.
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely had that experience, right? And I've definitely had the experience too of feeling accepted, but not necessarily like you heard me or you understood me.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Nice. I
So
like that you're making that distinction.
it's like the acceptance is like well, cool. Like yeah, I do. I feel like you love me, accept me, get me as a human being, but I still don't feel understood, and so
Yep.
there's still something incomplete. So until you, I feel, but once you add in the thumb, the understand is like ah, something
Yes.
in. And what I've always been just absolutely fascinated why when I say something and you and you let me know that you understand what I just heard, how I know is not a thought. I know because I
Mhm.
go like this.
Ah,
It's a
yeah.
body.
What
It's
is
an
that?
embodied thing. And I think that has something to do with the word. Like, oh, I get that. Like, I get that you get that I make sense. And I make sense to you,
Mhm.
right? And because I
Mhm.
make sense to you, then
Mm.
that validates my
Mhm.
own
Yeah.
way of making sense to myself,
Yeah.
right? And that's that term, making sense, right?
Mm.
Because you usually think about making sense as I think about like I'm trying to figure something out mentally. And maybe that's the way that it ends up happening. But the moment I get it, it drops into a sensation, a felt
Mhm.
sense.
Mm. Mm. Making sense. Sensation. Wow.
Yeah.
I like that one. I like that formula.
I just thought about this the other day.
Nice. Nice. So just to repeat what you said, because this is also what I was highlighting in this quote, is getting the other's intentional stance. Well, first you listen for how it makes sense, and then you're getting their intentional stance. It equals understanding. It equals a feeling. I mean, like you're saying, they don't have to follow each other, but that's what we're aiming for in circling. We're finding ways. And the one way it works is because I think we have multiple people in a circle reflecting different things. And so I'll often not see a lot of things, and then somebody will say something that I just love where did they get that from? But then I'm able to see, it just, we keep waking each other up as a group. It's
Mm,
not just, again, that one-to-one relationship,
mm,
a therapist and client, which and I'm not putting it down. I'm just wanting to say that these, because there's a lot you don't get in circling that you can get in therapy. Let's just say that. So, but when we get the understanding, the acceptance, then the phrase here is increased confidence, like you're saying, that our experiences are safely contained in the new attachment relationship. And again, my query is that phrase,
mm.
is that happening as a surrogate attachment relationship in the field? So I'm just looking for all the ways that, I don't want to force the theory. I want it to be illuminated. And I think that will happen by people responding. And if there's concerns or doubts or questions, that we can, as a community,
Yeah.
really.
There's something here. This thing about like making sense too.
Mhm.
There's one of the things that there's in teaching people how to circle, right? A lot of it is actually, opening up one to circle. You have to do with your whole being, right? If you have a relationship, it's really done with the whole being,
Mm.
right? And there's this one of the things over the years that has been articulated out of circling, because that's how circling has come to being. I think how psychotherapy is coming to be. Anything involving knowledge that becomes words and then reiterated in practice and like a thing. It doesn't arise in the mind as an idea or a theory that then somebody creates a method. No, it's enacted in the body and acted out first, right? It's like there was a knowledge that was lived from the
Mm.
bottom up, in your
Mm.
behavior first. And that's so important. I think what he's talking a lot about is that that so much of the base level of relationship has to do with actually your more like your motor system, your sensory motor system,
Yes. Yes.
right? So for example, right now with you and I, you're shaking your head,
Yes.
right? And you're smiling in recognition, and I'm smiling, and there's this whole level of this very intricate, subtle, coordinated thing going on, that if all of a sudden I were just to be like, I'm talking to you, and all of a sudden I were to be I'm hungry right now, right? Or if I laughed at the wrong time, or I went outside of the range of the dance, it would be like something broke, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would be like
We
something
wouldn't have the attunement. Yeah.
we'd lose attunement. So attunement has a lot to do with coordination, has a lot to do with joining in, like
Mm-hmm.
like, and then if you were to join that feeling into at a bodily level, right?
Yes. Well,
And
yeah. You want to finish
and
that?
so it's like, as we learned how to do circling, and we started to understand, well, when people have these epic moments of feeling deeply gotten, how does that happen? And one of the big reasons that happens, we've teased out, is like, actually, that one is that, in a Heidegger and the existential phenomenologist talked a lot about this, is that you could almost say that the human being is that part of the cosmos that makes sense of the cosmos,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's the most vulnerable, self-transparent to itself opening, such that it makes sense of its world. We're almost indistinguishable from a sense making. And so another way of saying that is, my experience always makes sense, and in other words, as an internal logic to it. And so when you make sense to me, what you're doing is that when you make sense to me, it means that and I demonstrate that you make sense to me. I show it to you. Like, I let you know.
Yeah.
What I'm actually letting you know is that, like, I see the logic or the logos of your experience, how you make sense of your world, as valid. It's called validity,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when I validate when I validate you, what I'm really saying is, I'm validating the logic upon which your experience unfolds, and I understand it, and of course, oh, that makes sense to me, because if this is important to you, and then they said this, of course, how else are you going to feel? Of course you feel that way. In fact, I feel that way just listening to you.
And then there's a term called cross-modal responsiveness. Talking about the parent.
That's a sexy phrase. Cross-modal responsiveness. Everyone use that on your first date with somebody. Rope them right in, right?
Well, it's in what I hear you saying, and it contributes to this phrase "feeling felt," which is referenced in the book. This idea of feeling felt, that we often use that phrase in circling, but cross-modal responsiveness is between the parent and the child, where the parent responds. Let's see, what page is this on? Guess I didn't write down the page for this one. Sorry, but the parent responds in a different sensory register, and that there's a response to the emotional experience, but there's something that the way it's shareable is, you're not mimicking what a person is doing. Like you're describing, you're feeling it in yourself, and you respond as you would respond to that person. And there's a share, where something's shared.
Yeah.
They give an example of the child squeals with joy, and her mother's body answers with a responsive shimmy.
Yeah.
And he says it allows the child to feel known, and without it, she may only feel imitated. And so the idea here that I will get into as we just go along, I'm going to try to let go of trying to fit so much into.
So pause with
Okay.
there. So that seems really, that strikes me. So right there. So, like, you said something and I feel struck, right? Now you should go. You should just mimic me and go. You should go.
I should go. Yeah.
I feel.
And then
I feel mimicked by you, but I don't feel responded to by you, right? So this
Yeah.
difference between feeling mimicked or being mimicked and being responded to, what I'm
Hmm.
hearing you say is that it has to do with when I mimic you, I'm not really including myself, right?
Yes.
It's when I respond to you is when I have my own genuine, spontaneous
Yeah.
response directly to
Hmm.
you, which means implicitly it seems like I have skin in the game. You
Hmm.
see me implicitly in my unique response,
Hmm.
right, to your unique response. And I would imagine that one, on a base level, it's a confirming way to respond. So I'm basically saying that like your communication to me was legitimate enough for me to elicit myself being affected.
Hmm. I think that's really important. And it's, for me, it's an edge in circling to
I
keep.
love the way you just responded to that.
Cross
I felt, what was this? What was the term?
modal. You felt my cross
I feel so
modalness.
cross-modal with you. Oh
What
my
did I do?
God. Tell me about that.
Yeah,
I
and I
feel
want to share that
cross-modal.
that's just something in circling that is an edge for me that I wish I could practice more, that I want to practice more, waking up direct responsiveness, letting it be more varied,
Right.
more from more depth, more richness,
Mhm.
not just a habitual way of responding to somebody like, okay, here I'm showing you some compassion, or here I'm showing you,
Mhm.
here I am resonating with you, but how do you actually access the shared response, like you're saying?
So can I ask you kind of a personal question about that?
Sure.
Yeah. So does it, um, so basically what you're saying is that one of the things that you notice that like is an edge for you and that you want to like hone in more on is registering more of a sense of responsiveness to the other in your sessions and with people. Is that
Hmm.
what I heard you say?
Yeah, and I mean, I would be surprised if my clients said I don't already do that. I mean, I think in my work I do it,
Hmm.
and the good enough, I would say. But yet I'm aware that
Hmm.
personally,
Yeah.
in fact, I can put it this way, that in my work, a certain field is developed. I'm in the role, something really opens and comes alive for me, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
similar to these videos, where I'm really focused on you, what we're talking about. I'm feeling a lot as we're talking.
Yeah.
But other times when I'm not in the role,
Uh-huh.
that's where something can get more quiet
Hmm.
and maybe a little distant,
Hmm.
and so I'm interested in
Huh.
catching that kind of natural response and
Right.
growing it. Does
Right.
that make sense? Yeah.
It does make sense. And I think I'm curious about, does that make sense to you that there's ways in which you want to be more responsive that you don't always have access to and that you're working on? Like, does that link back for you, like with your mom or your family, or like does that make sense that that would be?
Well, I think you know the answers to that, but yes.
Hmm.
Yes, you know
Totally.
all about my mom and my family, and but
Totally.
I I appreciate you asking that, because it's, yeah, I think it's appropriate to bring specific personal examples into these explorations. And so
Hmm.
I think that there has become, I actually think I was more anxious when I was younger, but I'm curious, but I perceive myself as I became more avoidant in some ways. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I started studying this, I caught that, and I started to see how can I learned that avoidant attachment has to do with the suppression of feeling, and
Yeah.
on a regular basis, and within intimacy. A person who's avoidantly attached can feel all kinds of feelings by themselves or with somebody that there's no skin in the game, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And this might be generalizing, but I think it's an important way to just to consider it.
Totally.
And what
Totally.
happens when you're just meeting another human being, and what's your natural response without
Totally.
trying?
Totally. That, like, see, I think that that's so important. Because I've just watched this in circling that there's so, just watching how deeply um, self-regulating, when people share and they look up and they see a bunch of people coordinating movements in direct response to their utterance, right? You could see this warmth and this kind of human feeling just come over them as they as that coordination happens, right?
Mhm.
um and so I would imagine that, like, if it's so confirming, right? It's so confirming. Morris Berman has this notion about that. He thinks that the disconnection from our somatic being has to do with these experiencing extreme versions or chronic versions of what he would say is a disconfirming disconfirming ways of being responded to,
Yes, yes,
right?
exactly.
Because if you think about it, when you elicit a communication, it arises from the legitimacy of the self legitimacy of your personhood. And
Mhm.
so if somebody like hears you but then doesn't respond to anything that you said, and kind of veers off at a glance, right? So if you're like, mom, I'm hungry, and she goes like, look at the pink flowers over there that I'm gonna do that, right? In that moment, there's this kind of break, and I think we've all experienced there's
Yeah.
this weird, awkward break, right?
Mhm.
That kind of, you could say, creates a schism between
Mm.
yourself and the other.
Yes.
And in that moment, right, there's this kind of like, who's it calls? He calls it the basic fault, right? This schism between the self and the other, where what ends up happening is that you lose grounding in the somatic flow and feeling
Mm.
of being a body,
Mhm.
and you rise up and you start to identify yourself as an other for others, right?
Mhm.
So, which is an attempt to heal the fault line or the schism between the self and
Mm.
the
I
other.
like how you're saying that. And I felt really sad feeling into that, imagining myself or anyone else having that experience where you have to
Mhm.
dissociate from your body self, the flow of experience, become a self for others. But I like that phrase, heal the fault, the schism.
Totally.
Yeah.
And he says that to the degree that yourself is
Wow. I'm just, whoa, just took that in another level. I mean, it sort of just keeps coming through me. And
that's listening right there. That's listening right there. You're
where you
being
stop the other person from talking to say, I'm still taking it in. It's still, wait, it's still affecting
impacted.
me.
See, I feel really heard. I feel really connected to you, and I feel
Hmm.
like a sense of expansion or inspiration or excitement. It feels really alive.
And I just wish that our whole world could learn that it's not just about listening and holding space and not including ourselves. That's something I just love
Mm.
having learned in the community here, is that each of our experience matters. When I'm talking, if I'm being circled, your experience matters. What's happening over there? I mean, it's so dynamic, you know?
Right. And to deepen that just a little bit and complete that loop, I think that what 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 Bierman would say would be something like, so we lose connection with our somatic grounding of being a body, and we, in those weird, awkward, disconfirming responses, we kind of like break from it and then start to become an other for others, right?
Mm. It could be, you could use that word fawning, right? Where somebody's
Yeah.
just paying attention, like maybe it's a hovering or a smothering, but instead, when both people's experiences matter,
Yeah.
when somebody could say, I love what you're saying, but I'm getting tired, I just need to pause. For nobody can ever say that. When does that happen? Can we
Yeah.
pause for a moment and just be here?
Totally.
I
And
mean,
so,
oh.
and there's, I think you brilliantly just brought it back to what he would say, that he's like, okay, if you want to know to what degree that yourself has been confiscated,
Mm,
this is how you know, is to what degree are you comfortable being in the presence of other people
mm-hmm,
and being in silence.
mm,
um, Morris Berman would say, and he wrote, I think this has come from the book Coming to Our Senses by Morris Berman, a brilliant book about this stuff. I think what he would say would be that to the degree that you're comfortable in silence around other people, right, is to the degree that you're grounded in the somatic reality of your body.
Self and other. This, I did want to say something particular, which is that so what circling invites for both of these attachment styles is for the preoccupied anxious, that's more, the idea is under stress, that the attention goes more to the other. And so circling invites the preoccupied to feel themselves, slow down, feel yourself more, include your experience. And for the avoidantly attached, if they get to circling because they do want to be in relationship, because they can even not want to participate. I don't know. I mean, that might be extreme, but the avoidantly attached can sit back and feel, not be pressured to participate, and just be in the field. And there's no obligation to answer anything in particular, but the invitation to study their own experience and participate as they want to. So, but so we come over to this side and, do different things that start to shift, that start to get through in some way, I imagine, right? And touches on parts over here, starts to wake up and engage, and then shift the energy down here.
Oh yeah, it's working.
You're feeling it?
Yeah, you a little bit more the other side. Go to the other side.
You need some more of that?
There you go. Okay, good.
Okay, so getting...
Go back to the...
So, yeah, well, what if I just name these two other parts, and then when we put the video up, I'm just gonna put the quotes and things that I wanted to read, so that people can just read them, and then we can go on to mentalization next time.
Totally.
So, so feeling felt is an important part. There's also something called upgrading the dialogue, and then there's something else called scaffolding. And when I read this part about upgrading the dialogue, I thought that's inherently what you have been showing me in reflection all these years I've known you. The quote is that Bromberg described psychotherapy as a process that allows patients to change while staying the same. So we do that in circling. Circlers to change while staying the same. Along the same lines, Friedman suggests that we as therapists need to accept our patients or fellow circlers on their own terms, while also refusing to settle for those terms. Striking this kind of balance requires us to assume that our patients, fellow circlers, are capable of somewhat more feeling, thoughtfulness, connection, or initiative than they believe they are. Expect too little, and the patient or circler feel his hopes have been betrayed. Expect too much, and the patient or circler may feel his vulnerabilities have gone unrecognized. And so I think that's exactly the level we're working at, where the depth of which we strive to accept what is, and then yet we're seeing parts of each other that we don't fully see yet, So you reflect what you're hearing and you add something to it, and I feel unexpectedly different. I think that you were doing that in the beginning of the video. I'd say you're upgrading the dialogue for myself, where you're reflecting to me what you see in me in this whole process. And then there's scaffolding, where we're trying on the other's experience, which is what we're always doing. Upgrading the dialogue to higher levels of awareness and complexity requires what developmentalists call scaffolding. So parents, for example, scaffold their child's emerging capacity for language by speaking for her before she acquires the word to describe her experience, and later by asking her to use your words. These two quotes are on page 198. And I think scaffolding is one of your specialties. And I wanted to know if you knew that phrase, or if you see what I'm saying, if you recognize that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely recognize what you're talking about. Scaffolding. Do you know why that metaphor is used? Scaffolding. Is it?
So sometimes you speak for the other.
Mhm.
It's again on 198, and you're articulating the unarticulated and unrecognized feelings.
Ah, yeah,
And some other times,
yeah.
receptive silence is called for to make room for the person, the patient circler, to feel or feel more deeply.
Mhm,
And at certain moments, we may need to bridge the dialogue to a more emotional level by going first and expressing our own feelings.
mhm,
So, yeah, this has happened where you'll start to say something if I'm,
mm,
at an impasse. You'll start to talk and it'll wake something up in me. Wow,
mm,
the wind is coming.
mm. Speaking of waking you up. Okay, so yeah, so I think I do get what you're saying in the sense of that there is in listening to you. What one of the things I've been because we're doing the Explorer weekend coming up,
Oh, right.
um, it's all about attunement. This particular one is all about deep
Mm.
attunement and like things like deeply listening, and really kind of getting that all the way into our own being and practicing that, and developing that part of ourselves. And it's so interesting how deep this one goes, right? Like when I listen with my whole being, the thing that struck me is that the the problem with being a speaking being is I only have one mouth. I have two ears, I have two eyes, I have two of everything, but I only have one mouth. That's such a bummer. I think
I've never heard anybody say that, I don't think.
because I have one mouth, it makes speaking fundamentally really different than listening. Because like when I speak, I can only speak one word at a time, one sentence at a time, and when I try
Right.
to do more of that, I get scattered. So, but
Mm.
listening is not linear; it's holographic,
Oh, I see what you're
right?
saying.
And
Yeah.
and that's why it's important. And this is why it's important to really educate your listening, because the more educated your listening is, the more distinctions that you have, the more that you can hear, right, what somebody's saying, because you're holding all of that knowledge or those distinctions at once. So it'd be kind of like a thing where you say X, Y, and Z, and what I hear in between X and Y is a whole other alphabet, right? And it's
Hmm.
not like you don't know that that's true. You may didn't know that you knew that that was true, but you could only say what you're saying. But because I'm attuned to you, and if
Hmm.
my listening is really like really attuned and educated, and the more distinctions I have, the more I can see and respond to, and
Exactly.
paraphrase or reflect, right? Not only what you said, but like what you didn't say, and what you didn't know that you didn't say, and that
Hmm.
you didn't know that you knew, which in a certain sense is upgrading the conversation, because like you're
Yes.
bringing your linear kind of struggle to talk about, make sense of yourself, and it happens inside of a vat of like one care,
Hmm.
right? And then two, I can receive all of the verbal and nonverbal communications and hear in between the things that you're saying, and then I can bring all that in some way back to you. And then it's and in some way it's more whole. What you said is like what you send out, what is true comes back to you more whole. And I think that wholeness is felt by like this, like the experience of being gotten like,
I love that you keep putting it in a body response,
yeah.
and so that's what we started with at the beginning, and you made that gesture towards the beginning, and that being the signal
Mhm.
that you're being gotten, that you're feeling felt.
Totally. What I'm really appreciating about this is like, I think the most important thing is that we're in a real dialogue. So
Mm.
it's kind of like I love personally that we're not getting everything, and that we're going on. I'm having ideas and they're alive, and you're having responses to my ideas and having ideas that are alive. And I think what that is like that's how we constitute each other in relationship, is we continually move towards the unknown and come to terms with things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we're inviting everyone into in listening to this conversation is to not just receive information, but think along with it, right? And that's why we want to say, put your questions in the Facebook chat. Like, let us know what you think. Tell us where you disagree, right? Notice how young we both look and how amazing it is that you thought we were in our early 20s, but actually.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's
really
wonderful to talk. Yeah.
Really good being with you. So it's like, I just take a moment and just feel the reverb or the atmosphere of just our connection. What's there for you?
I feel a buzzing in my arms, and I feel a relief again of not being so attached to all the things I wanted to read and reference. Just more of being in a space with you, and I feel confident that enough is being we're being specific, while actually just I guess it's almost like I took a drug and found myself just in a space with you that I didn't know I was going to be in. I thought it would be more didactic, and I'm surprised. I feel surprised at how interactive it feels.
If it wasn't didactic, what's the word that you would describe the space that we're in?
If it wasn't didactic?
Yeah, you said you thought it'd be more didactic.
Yeah.
What is it more of?
It's fully affectively attuned, intersubjective, cross-modal field of caregiving, secure base, safe haven.
Grand slam. You did it. I feel exactly the same. I feel so cross-modal, like with you, and effectively attuned.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I feel very similar. It was yeah, I feel there's a fullness, there's a relaxation, there's a lightheartedness and a depth. And I think mostly, I think a lot of that has to do with just, I love it when you get nervous, because I think what I get that it's not pleasant being nervous, but like, that's not what I love, is that you're,
No, I know what you mean. I appreciate that. I feel safe being nervous with you. In one way, I'm just talking to you. So, yeah.
Well, and I think what it taps into me is like, it's you're nervous because you care about something. And like, that's what I always feel when you're nervous. I'm like, oh my God, something's really important to you. And I felt closer to that, and thus closer to you. And I like being close to you.
Ditto. Thank you, Guy.
Thank you, Marshinka. Love you. And
I love you.
To be continued.
Oh yeah.
Mwah.
See you.
Don't go away. I won't live.
Bye. Goodbye.